See. All right, so if you want, just if anybody wants to move their tables, I'm used to hopefully not seeing the back of your heads. It's never been fun to see for obvious reasons while I stand in the pulpit. So first of all, I want to thank the Men's Club and the Sisterhood through their representatives here for putting this together. It's always a pleasure to do this. I've done it for a number of years now. I want to thank Ruth Fisher, who is the party planner extraordinaire for all of us, and who always tells you that you have to get in your reservation by a certain date, and always gets a call the last moment and says, somehow I'll let them in. I want to thank Alfred Pachter and Circle of Life Catering for all the work they did. I want to thank the maintenance staff who put this room together, have to take it down, put it back together, etc. My colleagues who are here, with whom I work all the time, and it's been a pleasure to do so. And I want to thank all of you for coming. Finally, I want to thank Kara and Mayor for sponsoring the wine tasting beforehand. We're very, very appreciative. So, welcome to my bar mitzvah. Nobody, even Bryna, was at my bar mitzvah, so I'm not going to rehearse that with you. And I'm not sure what everybody expects this evening. I decided to speak on what I want to speak on. I never give a title. I'm not going to mention anybody by name, so you don't have to worry. I know some of you already are worried. I've always said that I will mention all of you by name when my book comes out, and it'll be published posthumously, so I won't have to worry about it. But what I wanted to do was kind of reflect back on in a sense, being a rabbi for 42 years. It's a very, in many ways, as I did this, it's a very personal statement. I'll try to give time for questions and answers for those who want to stay around. Almost any question will be permitted. I may decide that some aren't and veto them. After all, you know, this is the day and age of doing that. So, in May 1976, I was ordained as a rabbi, teacher, preacher in Israel by the Jewish Theological Seminary. The event occurred at Park Avenue Synagogue in New York City, and Bryna received her MA in Jewish history at exactly the same time. Looking back on that event some 42 years ago, almost exactly, I now realize how much I did not know and was not prepared for the rabbinate that I was about to enter. I had studied for 4 years in rabbinical school, including 1 year in Israel, but had very little practical experience. I might have been able to teach text, but to officiate at life cycle events, perform rabbinic duties, was not something with which I felt totally comfortable. In June of '76, I was hired as the assistant rabbi of Congregation Rodfei Tzedek in Hyde Park. I came to the congregation in July. Rabbi Ralph Simon of blessed memory, the senior rabbi, was then in Israel, and I was left to make my way all by myself. In a sense, for over a month, I was in charge. Thankfully, there were no major issues. I'm not sure I would have known how to handle them at that time. However, I do believe that over time, I learned from a great deal of life experience, from book learning, from colleagues, from watching Rabbi Simon, and from simply doing the work, what the rabbinate is all about. I began to officiate at life cycle events, was involved in counseling, was teaching in and running the Hebrew school. I was involved in conversions. I was preaching regularly from the pulpit, and I became involved in the administrative work of the congregation. I even learned how to read a budget. And those of you who sat with me on budget committees know that I can do so. Over time, I also became active in my local community. Looking back on those 12 years, from a professional point of view, I see now that the seeds of my career began to take root. In 1979, I decided to go back to school, and I joined a degree program at Chicago Theological Seminary, a liberal Protestant theological school in Hyde Park, in order to gain my Doctor of Ministry degree. I was the only Jewish student in the school at that time. For 2 years, I studied at the school and eventually did some teaching there as well. I was extremely proud to receive my doctorate in 1981, and the certificate, which includes the words Christo e Ecclesiaste, hangs on my wall, right next to my JTS ordination diploma. It was the beginning of my academic career, allowing me to teach then at the Spertus College of Judaica, and now at the Spertus Institute for Jewish Learning and Leadership. I was invited by a member of the congregation to be involved in the work of what was then the Jewish Children's Bureau. And over time, I joined the board of JCB. Slowly, I began to get more involved in the Federation. I got to know some of you through that work in the community that I started with in Hyde Park, in its fundraising aspects and its policy decisions. When I joined Bethel, I had just been asked to serve on the board of Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Chicago. And for the last 30 years, besides a couple of years, I've had the privilege of serving on that board. I'm now rotating off. I've served all my service, and it's been a great pleasure to serve at that particular level of the community. I became involved at that point in our local rabbinical assembly in the Chicago Board of Rabbis. I met rabbis from different streams, and we worked together for the betterment of the community. I joined the Broadcasting Commission of this Board of Rabbis. You remember Tiny Toe, many of you, the Magic Door, and Sanctuary, and all those programs. I eventually became the chairman. I had to read the scripts for Tiny Tove and the Magic Door, and all of those things. It was the beginning of my career, leading to the presidency of both the Chicago Board of Rabbis and the local and international Rabbinical Assembly. Congregation Rutfeld Tzedek housed the Akiva Schechter Jewish Day School, which was a joint conservative and Orthodox day school. It was really a unique hybrid. Bryna began to teach there. In the last 2 years we were in Hyde Park, she was its principal. I was its chief fundraiser. I learned the art of fundraising on the fly, and over the period of many years have continued to raise funds for this synagogue, for the Federation, for our community, for the conservative movement, and for the State of Israel. I also became involved in a number of national programs, including a young leadership program of the United Jewish Appeal Rabbinic Cabinet. We were a young cohort of rabbis, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, just starting out, just getting our feet wet in the pulpit, just learning. And through them, I learned the work of the Federation movement, the United Jewish Appeal, I can say almost Alav Shalom, and the Jewish Agency for Israel. Over time, that particular learning led me to the chairmanship of the UJA Rabbinic Cabinet in its day, and my current position on the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency for Israel. These were the skills that I brought to North Suburban Synagogue, Bethel. Some of you may remember, I was hired around Yom Kippur in 1987, but I didn't officially begin until the summer of 1988. And some of you may recall, going back those far, those were very challenging years. We were still in the process of building the Posen Rabbinic and Administrative Center and updating the Bethel facility. The first time I came to see the facility, I put on a hard hat so we could go see the building with General Levine to be able to show us what was happening. Funds then were at a minimum, and we had to stretch our budget just in order to make ends meet. I've looked back at minutes. You will, in November, receive a book that Mort Steinberg is now authoring about the history of the congregation, and it points out that we were hugely in debt during those early years of my tenure here. And, again, for those of you who are here that long, following my friend and colleague Rabbi Bill Lebo was not an easy task. He was and continues to be a rabbi's rabbi, a friend to all. And when he assumed the position of Vice Chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, many of you mourned his loss, the loss to your community. I was fortunate that Bill was then, and continues to be today, a good friend and supportive of my rabbinate here at Bethel. Brian and I moved to the North Shore. We moved from HP, Hyde Park, to HP, Highland Park, and stayed on the lake. That was the basis of my first Rosh Hashanah sermon. There was, as some of you may recall, has to be told as it is, great competition from other synagogues for members and funding. I had to prove myself to all of you, and also to myself, that I could manage to be the senior rabbi of a large conservative synagogue on the North Shore that had great possibilities, but found itself at a crossroads. Thankfully, I can look back today, 30 years later, and see that that was part of my growing experience in the rabbinate and in this community. Now, 30 years later, I hope I've gained proper perspective as I work towards the end of an active pulpit rabbinic career. I will always carry the title Rabbi. You don't lose it. But in the future, I don't see myself in the full-time pulpit experience. I do hope, with God's help and with good health, that I have a great deal left to contribute to the Jewish world, and that hopefully some of the skills that I've gained over the years will allow me to do so. As part of my studies at CTS, at Chicago Theological Seminary, we had an intensive week-long program entitled The House Church. The title suggests that it is a quasi-religious institution, not necessarily found in a large institutional setting. My professor, Philip Anderson, and his wife Phoebe wrote a book entitled The House Church, which I still have. From the title itself, The House Church, as you can well imagine, I was somewhat leery of joining the course. However, he convinced me that I would be comfortable with the many ministers who were part of the learning experience and who, like me, had gone back to school to work on their doctorate, always active in the ministry. In his book, Anderson states, "The goal of the house church is to become a loving, trusting community within which persons change, become whole, be enabled to love, to feel of worth, and take charge of their own lives." In the book, he suggests that individuals can join together for worship and other experiences which enable them to become a unit, whereby they can share true feelings and emotions as they grow theologically and personally. The process, as I recall it, was emotionally and physically draining. For 5 days, we spent almost every hour together, telling our stories, exposing ourselves in work and deed to people who were relative strangers, and in my case, as the only Jew present in the program, people of another faith system, and sharing with one another our innermost fears, our anxieties, and our sentiments. As part of the program, we were asked to put in diagram form the pillars of our lives and our careers. In the work that I did, and I look back on it now because I still have it, and I framed my personal and professional life on 4 pillars, which is a good Jewish thing to do, though they didn't necessarily understand that. The first pillar was, and always will be, family. As you know, many of you at least, Brian and I first met as teenagers, and we've been on a long journey together. God willing, in another month or so, we'll celebrate our 45th wedding anniversary. We left the Jewish Theological Seminary, frankly, without any money to our names, but with no student loans. We came to a strange community and a strange country. We learned to live in the Midwest and to love it. We learned how to celebrate the American Thanksgiving and appreciate it. We learned how to navigate corporate synagogue life and honor it. In Hyde Park, both Hadassah and Shira were born, and we rejoiced with our congregants and friends there. When we moved to Bethel and to the North Shore, the girls entered new schools. Here, the Solomon Schechter School and the Sager Solomon Schechter School, and we learned how to live in the suburbs rather than the city. The first thing we had to do was to make a carpool. The second thing we had to do was buy a station wagon. We were told if you want to be part of the carpool, you better have a station wagon. So we did. We, as you all know, and many of you were present, we celebrated their Benot Mitzvah here at the congregation, as you rejoiced with us. While Hadassah got married in Israel, Shira's wedding ceremony and reception were right here in this building, in the Field Family Sanctuary, and here in the Blomberg Auditorium. We, thank God, now are at the stage of having 6 grandchildren, 4 in Israel and 2 in Boston. We rejoice in being with them, or if you will, second best, seeing them on the computer or the iPhone. And those of you who are grandparents know exactly what I'm referring to. You have been with me through the high points and the challenges of our family life. Through the losses we have endured, which includes both of our fathers, my mother, and my younger sister Janice, you have been there for us, and we are forever thankful. We will never forget how supportive this community was to us in so many ways. We are very fortunate to have very close extended families on all sides. For example, a short while ago I was in Israel. I spent time with Bryna's family, and she was in Toronto, and she spent time with mine. We look forward to spending more time with all of them as my rabbinic career slows down. The second pillar, of course, was all of you, my congregational life. You are all part of my extended family. I will periodically sit on the bima on Shabbat morning and look around the congregation. I see individuals with whom I have interacted in so many fashions. Some of you I married. Some of you I have named. Some of you I have converted. Some of your children and grandchildren have studied with me, and many of you have continued to learn with me over the years. For some of you, I've conducted all kinds of life cycle events, including, unfortunately, many of the funerals in your families. You've allowed me to join your family, and I have appreciated that greatly. When you lose someone, and especially if I know them well, I feel the pain. Being the rabbi of a synagogue for 30 years creates great opportunities to see dor achar dor, one generation after the next. I rejoice in being able to see a bat mitzvah, a wedding, a naming of the same families in very clearly. But it also drains you as you feel the loss of people close to you. Periodically, over the years, people will say to me, "Rabbi, you look tired." Well, my friends, the rabbinate is a 24/7 job, period. And I work very hard at it, and many of you know I get up very early in the morning to exercise, and the day does not end early either. I love the teaching. I enjoy the preparation, and I love the preaching. And I'm grateful when I can help someone. But it is also tremendously taxing. You don't know, and even Bryna doesn't know, what I continue to carry inside of me. People share with me many things in confidence, and I can trust you to know that they stay with me. Funerals and the losses of people that I've known over the years take their toll, and even happy events have anxieties and issues attached to them. I remember studying at the Hartman Institute a number of years ago in the fall, and my colleagues were sitting there, and one of the people said to me, "You just look so tense, so anxious, and so tired." Why? I said, because I just come from a period of about 6 funerals over the course of 3 weeks. People that I knew well. It just takes its toll. The rabbinate can be a lonely job, but I also believe it is a most worthwhile calling. Rabbi Jack Bloom, of blessed memory, wrote a book entitled "The Rabbi as a Symbolic Exemplar." In it, he writes these words: "Being a rabbi means being set apart in the Jewish community to serve as symbolic exemplar. Symbolic exemplarhood is crucial for all clergy, and no less than for the rabbi. Jewish tradition exerts much effort not to portray the rabbi as a person set apart. Pulpit rabbis struggling to deal with their symbolic exemplarhood spend much time and energy pointing out to their congregations that they are, after all, only human. Yet, the fact remains that rabbis, having set themselves apart, are most certainly set apart by those they serve. Just think of it, and I know I speak for my colleagues on this. We tell you all to take advantage of the Shabbat, to rest and relax. That's the most taxing day of our lives in the entire week. The stress on us and on our families doesn't stop. That's part of what we take upon ourselves, and we understand it. But it's so different than what we ask you to experience. He then goes on to suggest that in the moral and religious realm, rabbis assume a larger-than-life image. It's at the core of being a rabbi, or in fact any clergy person, and is unavoidable. Some of the closest associations I've had over the years have been people who are ministers or priests of other faiths, because they get it. They stand in exactly the same place. Bloom writes, "The rabbi is both designated by others and is knowingly or unknowingly volunteered to exemplify a religious, caring, nurturing, involved moral person. a caring, paradigmatic model of what a Jewish human being should be. Choosing a profession which is crucial to be perceived by others to be something more than it is, while still maintaining ongoing contact with other people. The rabbi takes on the duty of being the fulfilled Jew, the spiritual savant, the willing helper, the good parent, the knowing older sibling, the parafamiliar member of many families. In short, the rabbi, as well as clergy of other religious orders, is expected to live, and should live, at a higher level of religiosity, morality, ethics, and behavior. You don't necessarily expect all of the congregants to live by the realms of halakha, but you sure expect your rabbi to do so. You don't expect all the congregants to be here, there, and everywhere all the time, but you sure expect the rabbi to do so. And by the way, the same goes for the cantor. It's interchangeable. Well, I knew this intellectually when I assumed the title. You really only understand it when you're in the moment. While many of you see me as rather reserved and quiet, I think that's simply part of my character. It also relates to the position I hold. Frankly, I also like having a good time. But I also know that whatever I do, I cannot divest myself from the title I assumed and from the manner in which you, my congregants, and in fact, the entire community look at me. And yet, as I used to tell senior rabbinical students at JTS when I was president of the Rabbinical Assembly, I can think of no other profession in which you have an effect on people's lives, influence their decisions, and meet them at both the low points and high points of their journeys, and at the same time do what you love to do, teach Torah, learn Torah, and make a difference in the community. What a privilege and what an honor. And with everything I've said up to now, I would not change my life's calling for anything. The third pillar of my life then, and continues today, is the academic pillar, of which has remained an important part of my life. I take my teaching and my preaching very seriously. If you know me, I am always prepared, except when I have to read Torah on the spot. What? Preparation. I'm very proud of being a member of the faculty of Spertus Institute and teaching MA and PhD students both in the MA in Jewish Professional Studies program, the MAJPS, and the regular Jewish Studies program. I work hard teaching those courses, and I bring it back to my work in the congregation. And so I will announce that in the fall, I will be teaching a course here, probably for 3 evenings. We haven't set the dates yet. During the month of March, I taught an intensive seminar, 5 days, 4 hours a week, on Rabbi Akiva at Spertus. I will teach in the fall the same course here at Bethel, but without some of the expectations that I have of my MA students, all the readings and research papers. You're welcome to do them if you wish. I've been able to share my learning over the years in my Torah with others through the columns in the Chicago Jewish News. Besides its editor, since 1994, I'm the longest writing columnist. And in my book, Encountering Torah. And in the articles that I have published and have yet to, but that are still in preparation, but yet to be published soon, in books and periodicals. I'm very honored when people tell me that they read my material, learn from it, and even more so when others quote me, both my colleagues and my congregants. The final pillar is my work in the general and the Jewish community. I've always told the leadership of this congregation that I am a professional Jew. All of you here are volunteers. And I, even as a professional Jew, need to volunteer myself. And therefore, I spend my time volunteering in those areas which I think I can have the most positive effect. For me, those include the conservative movement, the federation movement, the interfaith movement, and the intra-faith movement, with rabbis of all denominations. In each case, I've been able, fortunately, to assume local, national, and international positions of leadership. In all cases, I have learned from the experience. I have grown to be a better person, a better Jew, and a better rabbi. I've tried to share those lessons with all of you over the course of my tenure here at the congregation. and to model that sense of leadership not only to the members of the congregation, but to other staff members as well. And I am very proud of the leadership positions that they have assumed in their particular expertise areas. And in all of my local, national, and international positions, I've been very proud to say that I am the rabbi of North Suburban Synagogue, Bethel, in Highland Park, Illinois. As I look back at the career now and gain some perspective, I know I've been very fortunate. I've been most fortunate to have Bryna by my side, who has been my rock, my chief critic, my confidant, my friend and advisor, and who's really been with me on this long journey. We met, as many of you know, when I was 15 and Bryna was 14, and so for 7 years we, dated. We just celebrated our engagement on Lag BaOmer, which was 2 years before we got married, and we've been married, I said, almost 45 years. It's a long time. We have learned to live together and to grow together, and it's been the pleasure of my life to have her by my side. I have served 2 wonderful congregations, and I've been privileged to learn from the many different people with whom I've come into contact. Hopefully that journey will continue. What I do know is that life 42 years ago was very different than it is today. While the challenges are somewhat unique, the values of our tradition are consistent and constant, and many of the answers really are the very same ones. When I started out, who would have thought that computers would be used by us each and every day? I still remember the Gestetner, and the whiteout, and the hand typewriters. They're all to the Chazan and the Rabbi, they don't know what I'm talking about anymore. That's how we began in the rabbinate. That communication around the world would be instantaneous. That learning can be gained in an electronic fashion, and that the scholarship of today could be so advanced. Who would have thought the definitions of gender, personal identity, and family life would be so much more difficult to define for the good, and I think also the not so good. Thinking back on it, I believe the world into which rabbis are now being ordained is much more complex, much more challenging, and easy answers are simply not so readable. Yet I also know that the values of our tradition, the personal attributes of honesty, ethical behavior, and good Jewish scholarship will continue to be the mainstay of pulpit rabbinic life well into the future. The rabbis in the seminaries today, on the one hand, are much more equipped to handle some of the challenges of everyday life, and also, on the other hand, cannot possibly be prepared for what will happen in the world tomorrow and beyond. No one can predict where we're going. No one has a clue what will happen even tomorrow. Some of you came to me and said, you heard the news about Iran, what will happen? We have no clue what will happen tomorrow, next week, or the month from now. We have no clue of what's going to happen in this world, and anybody who says they can predict it, don't listen. Who would have thought that the conservative movement would be under such stress in the American Jewish community when I left the seminary to today, and that the intermarriage rates would rise so precipitously, that the support for the state of Israel among the younger generation would be so endangered. Yet, who would have thought that trips to Israel have become almost commonplace for youth, young adults, and on the adult level, for those wishing to take advantage of them? Who could have thought, when I left the seminary, the Judaic studies on campus would grow to such an extent that it is commonplace, simply commonplace, that young scholars are being trained to teach at both the major and minor campuses around the country. It's a very challenging world. And yet I fully believe that the responses of our tradition, our Jewish wisdom, and the sages of old will provide answers and responses to the challenges of today and tomorrow. We are a people of hope and of optimism. We're an ever-evolving people, and I believe we will continue to be so in the future. This past weekend, the Jewish world suffered a loss, and Rabbi Dr. Aaron Pankin, who was the president of Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, was unfortunately killed in a plane crash. I knew Aaron. I did not know him well, but we had been together at a number of conferences. He was supposed to officiate at the ordination ceremonies Sunday. He wasn't allowed to do so, but he did on May the 3rd in New York. And today I spent some time at home watching the live streaming of his funeral as the Reform leaders spoke of the tender nature and the scholarship and the sense of loss for the entire Jewish world. This is what he said on May the 3rd. And I quote him both the Shivcho, or to remember him, but also an acknowledgement that I don't all accept everything he says in here, but it's important to read the whole thing. Our celebration comes this year amidst a particularly challenging and painful world, one that in many respects transcends anything I have seen in my lifetime. We now live in a world in which truth is distorted. Basic institutions of American life like the press, the courts, the electoral system, the FBI, the beautiful mosaic of immigration that made this country what it is, the dignity and value of public leadership and civil service, egalitarianism and the woman's right to choose, and so many others are threatened in ways we simply could not have imagined a mere 2 years ago. We see countries long civilized, reverting to policies of nationalism and tactics of scapegoating reminiscent of our darkest times. We labor, he said, under the challenges of privacy and the ability for noxious leaders to spread their message ever more broadly and more efficiently through the warped use of social media, cynical and often violent supremacist protests, and through targeting innocent immigrants and as vicious criminals. But here's the thing. So whether you agree with him or not till now, I don't care. But this, I want to stress, is what he said. The Jewish people and our religious friends of other faiths have seen this before, and we have lived through it and thrived and built again and again and again. We are a people of action and courage, of innovation and fearlessness, of adaptation and endless creativity. I wrote my words that I quoted to you before Aaron passed away and before I saw his words, but I would agree with him totally. The challenges are immense in this country and in the world. The challenges are immense. The institutional religion, Judaism is only part of it. The challenges are immense for denominationalism and especially the conservative movement. But we are a people of hope and optimism, and we have transformed the world in so many ways. 40 of us came back from the March of the Living, and I was asked by somebody tonight, what was the high point? And I said, the high point was, frankly, leaving Poland and landing in Israel. That's the world we now live in. We now live in a world where we have reborn ourselves on this continent and in our ancient homeland. It is a world of great challenge, but an unbelievable world of promise. As I look towards the end of my active pulpit rabbinic career, I do so both with a sense of satisfaction, but yet the knowledge that there is so much yet to do. I commit myself not merely to this congregation, but to the Jewish people in the future. I commit myself, and Brian was listening carefully, to spend more time with my family, so that they can have me as much as you've had me over the last 30 years, as I continue my own personal journey. I commit myself to further study of our sources and to teach them to others. I commit myself to continue to use my God-given talents and those I may not even know I possess at this time, for the betterment of my family, my community, my Jewish people, and my world. I have been truly blessed to be part of Bethel, and no, I'm not ending today, so I will be here for a little longer. But I pray that this, and I know, first of all, that the future of this congregation is bright and in good hands, and I also pray that we shall continue to be blessed in the future. How we share good news and good times with one another in the years to come. Thank you. I'll take some people want to stay for a little bit, still early. I'll take some questions that people have. No Nobody has a question? Ron Goldberg, I can't believe it.
What's next?
Okay.
What's next?
Yes.
What's next?
Any announcements to make about where you might be in your North American home?
I have said that our plan is to go to Israel and spend most of our time there. We have not decided where our North American home will be. We obviously have daughter and family and grandchildren in Boston. We have Ryan's mom, my sister, and a large family in Toronto. We have a brother-in-law and sister-in-law and family in New York. And we have lots of friends and colleagues and work still here in Chicago. I have a feeling we will rotate amongst the 4 places for a while, but exactly where we'll be to put down the roots, I'm not sure yet. Who's in it? Stand up so people can hear you, Donna. Yeah, but you get one. I told you to get one.
How has your relationship with God and your view of who God is changed over the years? And how do you feel that being a rabbi is next to?
So, did everybody hear the question? It's an easy one. How does your relationship with God change over the years? And how does my career, if you will, as a rabbi been involved with that and changed it? Is that fair? Okay, so the course that I teach at Spertus is in the MAJPS program. It is called God, Torah, and Israel. And the first time they were to see me, these are all people who are already working in the Jewish community. People who work in synagogues and federation work in JCCs, in Ezra, the Ark, whatever the case may be. And the first thing, I'm usually the 3rd or 4th course they take, sometimes the 2nd. And the first thing I ask them to do is to take out a piece of paper and write, as I do in with the students who are in the high school class, at dinner with the rabbi, God is blank. Fill in one sentence. I don't want a philosophical treatise. I want one sentence. You can all think about that. And it's we then begin to share with one another. So they, of course, asked me, what would you write? And I basically said I understand it as God as the creator, the revealer, and the redeemer, which is part of both our liturgy, our sources, and everything. How that is defined is a little bit different for each person. But I think those are the 3 pillars. So I would say that a couple of things have happened. One, I think I've had a more personal relationship with God after studying with Christians. JTS didn't prepare me exactly the same way, and working with Christians who see God in the moment, even liberal Christians, was a good experience. So one of the assignments we had was read the book Moby Dick and write a theological statement about it. Okay? So you can see theology in all different kinds of ways. So that would be the first thing. I saw God more on a personal level. But I've also, since I've specifically during the rabbinate have been an individual who's grown and matured, and in particular have had sustained losses, which hit you both in the eyes of faith, and on the other hand gives you a great deal of support. So it's very difficult sometimes to feel the spirituality in God's presence when you're worried about who's going to walk onto the bima as Joanne tries to get them up on Yantiv, or Herb Isaacs at the high school gets them up on Yantiv, and calling the page and everything else. It's a little difficult to feel that, and that's a challenge for rabbis and cantors who want to be in the moment. And yet, that's the challenge that we have. And so I am a person, wherever I am around the world as much as possible, who now loves to pray in a minyan. I didn't start out that way. I love to pray. I always have put on tallis and tefillin in my bar mitzvah every day, wherever, whenever. But being a part of minyan was not part of my thing until I started to get into the active rabbinate. The day, those of you who know me here, if I'm available, I'm here every morning, and if I'm available in the evening, day off or not day off, don't matter. And during my sabbatical, by the way, watch out, I'll still be coming to minyan because that's what I do. That's what I do. And when I go to Israel, I have a minyan there. So that's been a part of my growing experience, to receive God both in the personal level and in the sense of community. And the final thing I'll state is I believe there's both a vertical and a horizontal axis. I've talked about that before. It was in my sermon book as well. And that God is both with personal relationship with the divinity, but also in the sense of community. And that's what gives me a great deal of strength. I saw the head back there, but first of all, Neil. Just when I want to be involved in politics, especially Israeli politics. Okay? This better be better.
It has to do with the young people. In this country and everywhere, young Jews, what they are doing, and it's so different in terms of remembering all of us, understanding the challenges we face. There's so many ways that needs to be educated. I think you was perfect.
Well, that's sweet. Thank you. I do believe, people have asked me, so what are you going to do? I said, and my response is, to be very honest, I want to slow down a little bit. Okay? I've always said now Magiali at this point. I think I deserve that, and my family deserves that. But I'm also convinced that I have my hands in so many different things that things will come up and will continue to come up at my choice. And frankly, without giving away anything, they're already starting that.
Rabbi, you know how much we love you. And
Bernie, after that,
you know how much we love you and respect you over the years.
I still can't.
How we will miss you over the years.
Somebody want to say? I just can't hear.
How much they love you and respect you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was told by Bernie, who is one of the mentors of many of us here, both in this country and in Israel, of the love and the respect that people have. I'm honored, but I also know that I have to gain that every single day. And I've recognized that, as tough as it is, that's part of what the challenge is on an ongoing basis. And you really can't relax on your laurels. And those of you who know me, as I say, I prepare for everything. I try not to rest on my laurels. From the younger generation.
So from when you started to when you ended,
When I quite ended, but okay. Ending, right? Right, it's okay.
For the new rabbis that are coming out, what's one thing that you think is easier for these new rabbis coming out? What's one thing that you think is very difficult for these new rabbis that come out?
What is easier is, first of all, I would say the same thing. The information that's at your hand and the communication that's at your hand. It's easier at your hand because you can get your hands on all kinds of study material and everything that you just couldn't do in my day. If you didn't have the books in your library, you just couldn't get it. Okay? The computer is an unbelievable source. I don't have my iPhone on me, but all I need is Safari, and I can get almost every single text in Hebrew and something that's translated into English that I need. And I walk around with it. So I can be anywhere, open it up, and continue studying. That just wasn't possible. That is a tremendous resource. But it's also a tool, and that's it. If you don't use it properly, and if you don't study, it stays on the iPhone, it stays on the computer. And the same thing with communication. It is phenomenal to do for me when I was president of Rabbinical Assembly. We had rabbis around the world. It was difficult to be in touch with everybody on an ongoing basis, and I had responsibility of rabbis in Argentina and in Israel and in Paris. Today I have a couple of calls on Thursday for the Jewish Agency. We'll be on from California to Australia. You just got to get the right time, and hopefully the technology works. That is both a wonderful thing that happens, but it's also challenging because you today, like doctor, if people don't like what you say, what do? They go to the web and say, well, wait a minute, WebMD says, etc. We're in that world too. We're in that world too. So on the one hand, the knowledge is very powerful, and on the other part, the knowledge is very dangerous. I'll take about 2 or 3 more, and that's it.
What was the turning point or incident that you realized your passion in college?
What was the incident that really created my passion? I think I said this to those who were on with me on the 40th. The most impactful 10 days of my life was when I was behind the Iron Curtain visiting refuseniks in the former Soviet Union in 1983 with Rabbi Mordechai Simon Shalom in Moscow and then in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg. Bryna knew I left. She had no idea what happened to me for 10 days until I got off the plane. And my congregation in Hyde Park didn't know either. We went secretly. Some of the people I met, almost all of them got out eventually. I've been in touch with at least a couple of them still. But it was impactful for a couple of reasons. One, I realized how difficult it was for them to be a Jew and how hard they needed to work to it under threats that were unbelievably difficult. And two, how easy it was for me to be a Jew and to be able to learn and study and grow. And if I didn't take advantage of it, shame on me. And I came back, and I became very involved in Soviet Jewry. I co-led the rabbinic march downtown, where we carried Sifrei Torah. Some of you may remember, 1984, I think it was, downtown. I was involved in the big march in '87. It was the day this congregation honored Rabbi Bill LeBeau. Bryna was here. I was in Washington, D.C. And that changed my life from the point of view of the horizontal nature of understanding what Jewish world is and my responsibility to care for it. Steve.
Being 42 years as a pulpit rabbi, if you could only give one piece of advice to a young pulpit rabbi, what would it be?
Continue to study every day. If you stop studying, I tell the Hebrew school students, and some of you have been in the study with me as parents, I said, if you don't join the Hebrew high school, don't expect that you're going to stop here and remember everything. You will go backwards. You'll lose your facility in Hebrew. You'll remember a few things, and that's it. Study every day. It's not simple because you have to put aside time. Those of you who know, again, we're here every day. I'm here at every minyan, every morning. The first thing I do, I try at least every day, unless the exigencies of time and profession get to me, I take my cup of coffee, I go into my study, and I study. That to me that's to me. Now, it doesn't have to be X. It can be Talmud, it can be Bible, it can be Jewish history, it can be sociology. But if you don't model that sense of study and you don't grow, you will not be a good rabbi. I don't care what skills you have. That would be my Mark. And then
We are, of course, part of your legacy. As you transition, what is your charge for us? What do you like to say?
So what's my charge for you? Be good to your rabbis. My charge to you ultimately is I hope that I've been able to instill in you a love of Judaism, a love of learning, a love of community, a love of the state of Israel and the Jewish people, which have been so much part of my life, and that you will continue to move with that forward with rabbinic leadership and cantorial leadership and educational leadership and volunteer leadership and open up new vistas. I believe people ask me about this congregation wherever I go around the world, and I say we're still physically strong, we are still very strong. Just look at our calendar of what goes on. We're having some demographic issues, which frankly, as far as I'm concerned, to a large extent are Highland Park issues. Travel the streets and see how many houses are for sale. Once we have still to figure out the public school system here. It's hurting people moving in or not moving in, and it affects who we are as a congregation. We can't produce people who aren't here. And we're part of the conservative movement, etc. But so that would be my charge. Take our legacy. And again, I've just finished rereading for the second or third time Mort's book. And I find it fascinating to see how far we've come from, as Richard Zelling told us on the holidays, of the Lakeville studies, of Marshall Sclair, who believed that this community would never have a real Jewish presence, from the 16 families who started here in a place which was not hospitable to Jews, and I look at what we've created. Okay? I'm very proud to have been the rabbi 30 of those 70 years. I think the brightest years are still ahead, but it's going to take work, it's going to take commitment, and I can only hope, that the values that I've tried to teach the congregation will remain the values that you will continue with in the future. See you last night. Well, that's sweet. Thank you. I'm not going to repeat that, so. Now the, oh, what?
I know that you have feelings.
I just had this discussion yesterday with my Sperta students. And I said, and I had it this morning too a little bit, okay? I had this, and I respond. Huh? The question was, I won't repeat the first part, you must have political positions and feelings. How is it that you don't portray them in that sense? I don't believe it's the rabbi to portray them. It's my job to portray values. I'm very proud of the fact that most of you don't know how I vote. I vote. And I don't know how I vote. And I think that's, so somebody said to me, well, how do you what would you say to rabbis? I don't believe that you need to be political. I think you need to be values-oriented. I will speak this Shabbos. You'll be able to read between the lines if you want. I can tell you now, but it's about values, and that's the key to me. And so I'm not going, when it came to the Iran situation, Rabbi Schwab and I talked, we did not voice an opinion from the pulpit. We did invite people to come in to have, there was that seminar by television, wherever it was, etc. We began to open up the questions. I've stayed away from politics. Maybe it's the Canadian upbringing, and I'm an immigrant in this country, and I'm worried about being thrown out. I don't know. We came legally, it's okay. Legally. But I've always felt that it's not my role in that realm. Are there people who would love me to be more political? I believe so. They've probably been disappointed. Only right. That's the second part of the answer. That no matter what I say, there's going to be people who disagree with me, and that creates a divided congregation. So I will end this way, and I want to go back to Mark's thing. One of the proudest things I am of my tenure here is that I've kept this congregation together. That we care about one another, that we work together, that we may not agree with one another, and that's fine. But we have to learn to respect and live with one another. Again, for those of you who were here 30 years ago, that was an unbelievable challenge. For the first 2 or 3 years, I had to work at it every day just to keep this congregation together. It was a major challenge. And I'm not going to tell any stories, but those of you who are here know how difficult that was. And I'm very proud of the fact that whether it's LGBTQ questions, or egalitarianism questions, or the Bima questions, or music on Shabbat questions, you name it, or our procedure of how many aliyahs to give out, etc., my response has always been, you don't have to agree with me, but I want you to respect me. Because my opinions come, I hope, with a good deal of learned scholarship and some life experience for what I think is best for the congregation. I can be wrong over time. That's fine. And what will happen after I leave will not be up to me. But I've tried to keep this congregation together. And I think politics divides rather than brings together today. So I believe rabbis standing from the pulpit will divide their community more than bring them together. You can teach values without giving political leanings. You can teach lessons of life and morality without stressing where you're voting. And you can ultimately make a difference in the community by keeping people together, because then they learn to care about one another and to be there in support of one another, of whatever political party they may be, whatever support they may have across the political divide. And I'd like to believe that that will also be part of my legacy. Thank you very much.
So I want to thank Rabbi Kurtz for those very moving and beautiful remarks, and I'm sure that we all feel that we're very, very blessed to have you, but I don't want to go without saying that I think we're incredibly blessed to have our full clergy team here, and we look forward to next year with a dinner with Rabbi Schwab. All right, so before we end, we have a few gifts. So, both Sisterhood and Men's Club have some gifts. What Sisterhood has done this year is I guess it's called dedicating 25 of our new Sidurim in honor of Rabbi Kurtz. So it's presented by North Suburban Synagogue Bethel Sisterhood in honor of Rabbi Vernon Kurtz. We did 25 of these. And then, just in addition, the 3 current presidents of the Sisterhood, myself, Rachel Ferber, and Mary Ellen Bowers, dedicated 5 large print Sidurim presented by Mary Ellen Bowers, Rachel Ferber, and Karen D. Weiss, NSSBE Sisterhood co-presidents 2016 to 2018, in appreciation of Rabbi Vernon Kurtz's many years of devoted leadership to this congregation and to Klal Yisrael.
Not to be outdone, Men's Club is likewise dedicated another 25 Sidurim in your honor, and it'll be a pleasure by a random chance to pick up one of those some Shabbat morning and see your name there in years to come. And also, to make sure that you stick around for many years to come, the Men's Club has also voted, the board and executive committee have decided to give you the gift of honorary lifetime Men's Club membership. Many steak and scotch dinners.
I'll come back for the steak and scotch. The caveman's not my favorite. Thank you all.